Now let's turn into the economic part, sir. My question is related to state finances. When we look into the financial health of the states, there are many states which have high committed expenditure than the total revenues, including the union transfers. For example, if you look into the Andhra Pradesh state, it is having committed expenditure 128% more than the total revenues. And there are many states which have high debt ratio. For example, if you take Andhra Pradesh, it is having 42%. So my question is this expenditure really going in a productive way?
Navina, your answer is self-evident. The question answers itself. If you are spending 128% of your own revenues on committed expenditure which you have no control, you cannot stop it. Obviously, there is a danger signal. Some states have gone to 180%, 184%, 180%. And even if you take Government of India's transfers of all kinds, including centrally sponsored schemes, etc., states like Punjab have gone to 80% already. And in every election, whenever there is a change of government, whenever there is a hope of winning an election, reckless promises are made, making long-term heavy commitments, disregarding the capacity of the state or the resources available. Sometimes even more dangerously, irrevocable legal commitments like switching over to old pension scheme without the pension being budgeted now. In effect, your generation, the younger generation, is burdened with the pensions for the services rendered for the current generation. Now, what moral or legal right does a government have to make a commitment for 30 years later, which is legally binding, cannot be reversed? It's not that a new government comes and changes policy, you cannot. It's out of your hands. So unfortunately, we are behaving as if there's no tomorrow. And winning elections is that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how we win. There is no purpose of election except getting into power for personal aggrandizement. Now, that's the reason why our constitution makers have very wisely provided for certain contingencies. I'm a great supporter of federal system. The states must be empowered. It does not mean that the states will act either autocratically or they will act recklessly, disregarding the future and destroy the future generations. The safeguards are available. We must start looking at them seriously and institutionalizing them, because otherwise, A, the country's economic growth will be a myth. We will fail spectacularly. And B, it is totally undemocratic for this generation to burden the next generation without any volition on their part. Is undemocratic and unconstitutional in my view.
So what can the states do immediately to overcome these revenue deficits, sir?
No, the good news is we are a growing economy. It's reasonable to expect that we'll grow at 7-8%. Even if 7% doesn't materialize, a consistent or average 5% growth rate is very much on the cards for us as a country. I would prefer 7-8%. Population also is tapering off. The kind of growth we have seen in population is no longer there. Therefore, the per capita income is going to grow faster. In such a climate, all you require is a bit of restraint. Because as income grows, overall GDP grows, along with inflation, some amount of 4-5% inflation is always there. The tax revenues for the governments at the union and state level will grow considerably, 12-15% a year. That means in 5-6 years, the income is doubled. Suppose the expenditure is contained either at the current level or don't allow it to go beyond another 15-20%, let us say. Because the 100 is becoming 200. So the 128% you're talking about will tomorrow become only 70%. Within 5-6 years, if we just exercise some restraint, some care. So that's the good news. If we're not a growing economy, if demography is not to our advantage like in India, suppose we're like Europe, this would have been a catastrophe already. Now there is a potential catastrophe, but need not be a catastrophe, provided, and that's the important thing, not without doing something. At least you freeze the current expenditure, which can be controlled. What cannot be controlled, you cannot do. Interest, you have to pay. Salaries, you cannot stop. Pensions already committed, you have to pay. So what is possible, you at least freeze it. Don't go overboard each time and add another 10,000 crores, 20,000 crores burden from each state. That much restraint to exercise. And two, have a more balanced approach, because you do require welfare. But welfare cannot be the sole purpose of the government. Government is there to fulfill the collective needs of the people. Therefore, what is required for economic growth? Infrastructure, quality education, healthcare, etc. So the focus must also be on those things so that investment is there, employment is generated, wealth is created, etc. That means at least, and this is the minimum principle, what's called the golden rule in economics, that is the borrowed money shall not be used for the current expenditure. That's how our families behave. Each of our families, whatever be the caste, region, religion, language, all our parents, our families, they go by that principle. That's why even in a poor country, we're all relatively okay. If our parents behave as irresponsible as our governments, most of our children have to be in the streets. So what our parents do in our families, our government must start doing. At least the borrowed money cannot be utilized for current expenditure. And there are enough constitutional mechanisms available for us to institute those safeguards and enforce them. We must enforce that. I think it's possible, but if we don't do it now, it will be a danger. The other part is your old pension scheme. Vajpayee government brought in the national pension system, basically a funded pension system, not an open-ended, unfunded pension liability 30 years later. That's what it means. So if you want to give pension, it's up to you, but put the money today in the account. Show it in the budget. You have no right to pass on the burden to the next generation and make a long-term irrevocable commitment today. It's illegal, immoral, undemocratic, unconstitutional, and anti our own children. So that must be the minimum rule. Two rules. One, borrowed money shall never go for current expenditure. Two, you will never make a long-term irrevocable commitments without the budget showing the allocation and funding today. And these two are eminently sensible rules. Anybody who says I don't accept them are being utterly irresponsible, callous. And within that, the states must be free to do, because nobody should control what they should do on a day-to-day basis. But these fundamental rules must be obeyed. Otherwise, you can go on printing currency. Why budget at all? I simply print currency. You know what happens if you print currency? You become Zimbabwe during Mugabe's time. Or you become Venezuela. What's happened in Venezuela? We don't do it, right? We are already following some rules. You're not printing currency as you please, because it just doesn't work. This also doesn't work. Look at Sri Lanka.
Next question is, sir, as you mentioned pension scheme, in the surge revenue deficit period, why the many states are preferring to go back to the old pension scheme from the new pension scheme?
I wish I could tell you the parties have a noble intention. No. Today, the game of power has become so crooked. Normally, I don't use such harsh words. I respect the political process. It's become so crooked and short-sighted that tomorrow seems to be irrelevant. Any weapon, any policy, anything, unless it's explicitly stated to be illegal, then we do it but don't state it. In this case, we do it and state it with pride as if we have done something great, disregarding the consequences, because parties believe people are fools. People don't understand what's going to happen tomorrow. They'll forget about it. And there's no tomorrow. Winning power today is all that matters. And therefore, it's always tempting for a political party to look at the short-term vote, even if the long-term is destroyed. And in this case, for instance, take the pensions, the negative impact will be physically seen by the people within 15 years, not today. No, 15 years is a long, long time for these politicians. And therefore, they're assuming that let the future be damned. Who will ask me? It's not, 15 years is too long a time. But it's real, it's mathematical, it is not a conjecture. It is not imagination, it is mathematical. In 15 years' time, these governments will completely collapse. And therefore, we must safeguard those governments and those people today. And the second point is, while there are states, and I am a great advocate of states' rights, you are an advocate of states' rights, you want local governments in the third tier, effective and empowered and sovereign state governments at the second tier, and the union government to discharge its responsibilities as well. It does not mean the states can be separately bankrupt. As far as the fiscal system is concerned, public finances are concerned, the whole country is one. There is only general government debt. So there is no way of insulating, let us say, if Andhra Pradesh or Telangana or some other state goes bankrupt, you cannot say, oh, it's your problem. It's not a gangrene wrestling which you can cut off. This gangrene affects the whole body. The whole country is affected. Therefore, the federal government, the union government has to take responsibility. You can't abdicate saying there's a federal system. And that's why Dr. Ambedkar and his colleagues, K. Munshi and others, The constitution makers clearly, very intelligently, with great foresight provided the mechanisms to ensure fiscal health in the states as well as the